Welcome to Introduction to the Junk Rig, Part 4, Sailing Junk Rig Boats. So the junk rig in summary. It's a very ancient concept, a 4 or 5-sided or even fan-shaped sail that is somewhat like a lug sail in that the sail is suspended on a yard that sits across the mast. But unlike most lug sails, it's fully battened. It uses a lazy jack system for reefing. And typically a single sheet is attached to all or almost all of the battens. Typically also, but not invariably, there's usually an unstayed mast. That is, there are no lines running from the mast to the side or the front or the back of the boat to support the mast. All of this has been explained in detail in previous parts of this Introduction to the Junk Rig series. For the purposes of this presentation, it's important to note that there are various different types of junk rig sail. Two in particular that we'll deal with today. There are what they call flat panel sails, like this one at the top picture. The flat panel sail has sailcloth that's cut flat and supported on the framework of yard, battens and boom and mast. It's aerodynamically slightly less efficient, but it's liked by many as it's simpler, easier to make, loads are more distributed. Many long-distance cruising sailors prefer a flat panel. An alternative, though, as you can see in the bottom picture, is a cambered panel sail. In a cambered panel sail, the sail cloth is cut and sewed so as to create a camber, a curve, a quilting or pillowing effect in the sail panels. This ensures that the sail presents a more aerodynamic shape to the oncoming wind. The cambered panel sail generates more force and has better windward performance in particular. There are several other more advanced options for junk rig sails, and we will deal with that in another video perhaps. Well, how do we sail a junk rig? Let's deal first with downwind sailing. A downwind sailor, as on a bermudan rig, lets the sheet run out so that the boom goes out to the side of the boat and the sail presents itself to the wind. But for a junk rig sail, as compared to a bermudan sail, let the sail out a good deal further than you would on the conventional yacht. Indeed, for a run, let the sail out so it's almost perpendicular to the line of the boat. You can't usually do this on a bermudan rig because the standing rigging, the shrouds, the side stays, get in the way of that operation. But on a junk rig you can. You can see it here.
Out in China as a young man, I'd seen a lot of the Chinese junks and the sampans, and I liked them very much. There's no standing rigging in a junk, unstayed mast, so you can let the sail, you can set the boom right out at right angles and go woof downwind, which means you don't jibe. If you alter so far you jibe, it just flips down to do it again. No problem.
With a conventional bermudan rig sail, you have to be very careful that the wind does not get behind the sail when on a run, because if it does, the sail flips over from one side to the other, an accidental jibe, sometimes with great force. The junk rig is gentler. Look at this picture. You can see from the white line that the boat is moving in the direction of the arrow, and the sail is sitting mostly to the port side of the boat. So the expectation is that the wind is coming from the starboard side. But look at the wind direction indicator. That's indicating that the wind is in fact coming from the port side, from the left-hand side. So the sail is not doing what you would expect. In fact, it is sailing by the lee. The junk rig is very tolerant of this sailing by the lee. One doesn't have to worry that just because the wind shifts a few degrees, the sail will automatically flip over. Even when the junk rig does jibe, well, the boom is lighter and the motion is gentler on a junk rig, so overall a jibe, accidental or not, is a less violent action. One may have to oversteer to get the boat to jibe, or sheet in and then guide the boom with the sail from one side of the boat to the other. Let's look at jibing. You can see what happened there. The helmsman pushed the boat around a little bit, enough for the wind to eventually get behind the sail. He let the sail jibe over, and sailing with the wind from the side is also similar to reaching in a bermudan, but the junk rig sailor may want to let the sheet out a bit further. In other words, the junk rig sail is aerodynamically a little better, a little more efficient when it is out a little bit further over the side of the boat rather than pulled more tightly in. Obviously the sailor has to watch the sail trim and adjust it as required for the conditions, and part 3 of this series has already dealt with the various trimming lines available on a junk rig boat. There are some different issues for a junk rig boat to a bermudan. A common issue for junk rigs, especially on a broad reach, is weather helm. Of course, weather helm can happen on any yacht, but it happens a little bit more probably on junk rigs. This is because the junk rig sail sits much further out over the side, so pressure is exerted further out along the sail, so it can push the boat to weather. The response to this in a junk rig with only one sail for our purposes: first, one can use the boom tackle to pull the sail forward, and that shifts the balance of the effort on the sail forwards and reduces the amount of weather helm. In smaller boats, it's an easy thing to move the weight of the passengers and crew aft, and that can often help with weather helm. Or one can simply loosen the sheets a little and reduce the amount of pressure on the sails. Sometimes weather helm is a signal that it's about time to put in a reef, and that very often will deal with the issue also, and very often with no reduction in speed. If the issue is serious though on a junk rig boat, there are more permanent solutions. One can think about changing the attachment point of the yard so that the sail sits further forward more permanently. One can even change the type of sail. What's called a split junk rig may have less weather helm on the same mast, for example. One can also think about weather helm as an issue with the shape of the hull and change or adjust the rudder shape to compensate. Or one could move the position of the mast slightly forward. Now let's talk about sailing upwind. To The question arises, do junk rigs sail well to windward? Yes, they do, often very well, but it depends on the boat, the rig, and quite often the sailor. A bermudan, especially a racing type bermudan sail, on an equivalent hull is likely to be quicker upwind than the junk rig, and it may even point a little better. But the disadvantage of junk rigs is less where cambered panel rather than flat panel sails are used. And there are more advanced junk rigs, wing sails and split junk rigs, which are better still. Junk rig though does have some advantages. It's simpler, it's easier to shorthand to windward. One thing to watch out for, especially with flat sails, is that the junk rig may point very close to the wind, but the speed falls off a good deal. In a junk rig boat, it's very often better to trade off by sailing 5 or 10 degrees further off the wind at a much better pace than to try to point as high as possible. Also on a junk rig, watch out for oversheeting. The boom will need to be a few degrees further to the lee than in a bermudan rig on the same hull. Also, especially with flat sails, the sail may not luff or stall as suddenly and clearly as a bermudan rig. So watch out for other cues like boat speed, heel, and the movement of the telltales and so forth. For junk rigs, tacking is a simple process. Just push the tiller towards the sail, let the boat go through the wind. Usually no need to adjust the sheets or do anything else. The boat looks after itself. Watch it here. Push the tiller over. Sail comes round relatively gently. Gather your course on the new tack. Okay. Here's another example. Pushes the tiller over. Sail comes round on the new tack. No adjustment required in the sheet. But the junk rig does have some issues. It may be slower to pick up speed on the new tack. The solution is just to bear off for a few seconds to gather momentum. With no foresail to back, in light winds or in a heavy chop, it might occasionally stall as it goes through the tack. If that's an issue, bear off on the original tack for a few seconds, gather some additional momentum before going into the tack again. It's usually just a question of getting to know your own boat. We're often asked as junk rig sailors about the good and the bad tack. On one tack, usually starboard, the wind blows the sail away from the mast, as you can see here. On the other tack, that you can see below, the sail is blown against the mast. So there's always been an assumption that there was a good tack where the sail hangs free, and that performance would be worse where the sail is pressed against the mast. In fact, a good many junk rig sailors report no difference in performance, or even that the bad tack gives the better performance. So the jury is still out. It depends on the boat and the sailors, probably. Junk rig sails, especially flat panel sails, but even cambered, may provide less visual feedback than more conventional sails. So junk rig sailors will tend to use telltales, especially on the leaches, perhaps even more than Bermudan sailors. Keen airflow will show in telltales that flow directly behind the sail. If the telltales are flapping behind the sail, it may be time to sheet out. Reefing is usually very simple and fast on a junk rig boat. Simply uncleat your halyard, Let the halyard out so that the sail falls by the width of one or more sail panels as required. Then haul the sheet back in, trim the other lines as appropriate. As you can see in this example, it's not even generally necessary to turn to windward to reef, but it might make the process somewhat easier sometimes. And that's it. That's reefing in a junk rig boat, as simple as that. Junk Rig Association is accessible via its website at www.junkrigassociation.org. We would be delighted to see you there and to have you join us for what is a nominal fee. Thank you.